So we're now looking at the break statement inside of the control flow of Python, and we're going to do it two ways. So we're looking at this for loop, and we're going to break out of the for loop. That's one of the purposes of the break statement. So let's create a for loop for I in range. So a standard for loop, for, let's say 10, just to make the range a little bit bigger this time. 10, and then print I. So our loop will look something like this, but we're just going to start this from, we'll go from 1 to 11 actually, and the reason why is that we're going to introduce this percentage sign as well, but we don't have to, but we're going to introduce a percentage sign as well. And if the percentage sign basically gives the remainder, so there's three ways of doing a division, that was in the previous video, and if there's a remainder from the division, so here, you know, in our like little reminder example, 41 divided by 20, it fitted in with two holes, and then there was 1/20th remainder. So if there's a remainder of the division, then it will be not equal to 0, and if there's no remainder, then it will be, or the other way around, and if there's a remainder, then it'll be equal to 0. So all we're going to do at this point is we'll print I equals 5, but we'll start with not doing that, but we'll just start with a little test, and we'll put in an if statement. So if I say is greater than 5, or I is greater than say 2, then we will break, right? And we're just expecting this now to effectively go through this loop, check the first iteration, the value will be 1, so I will take the value of 1, so we'll print 1. Then we'll do this check, I is 1, so I is not greater than 2, nothing will happen. Then it will go through the loop a second time, I will be 2. It's still fine because we haven't put greater than or equals to, so these things would make a difference, that would make a difference. And then it would, so we'd print out 2, then it would go through a third time. So let's just run that piece of code, and we see this 1, 2, and 3. So that kind of like works the way that we're expecting. And that is actually the classic sort of break statement in Python. But we could also do something like this. So the break statement, so this is, and we'll call it an example with the for loop. And we can just do one more example with the for loop, but this time we'll throw in, just to get a little bit of practice with something else, that if I, and we'll do percentage 5, which means if I divided by 5, and we're going to check if that is logically equal to 0. So if I percentage 5, and this doesn't mean percentage, I'm just saying percentage because that's what the sign is. If I divided by 5 returns a division that's 0. So so for example, if I was 5 and 5 divided by 5 will be 1, there'll be no remainder. So if there's no remainder, the remainder is 0, then we will break out of the loop. And that's why we couldn't put 0, because 0 is going to leave no remainder. So and it would break out on the first instance. So again, I think we'll have to put a well, actually we will have to put a break print some dashed lines in here basically. So dash and then we do times by 10. We'll do that to get 10 dashed lines in between, so that our code looks nice and clear, so that our outputs at least look nice and clean. And we get 1, 2, 3 from the first output, and then we go through and we get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that exactly worked there when if I equals 5, so when we got to that point, or if I percentage 5, so I divided by 5, if the remainder of that was 0, then this bit of the loop is triggered, and we break out of the loop. So that's basically the break statement inside the inside a for loop, and it's going to work similarly inside a while loop. The one thing about while loops is we have to be a little bit more careful, which is if we get the loop wrong, then we'll end up in an infinite loop. So whereas in this loop, if we for some reason don't get this equality right, like if I percentage of 5 is, I don't know, is not equal to 1,000,000 or something, then the loop is only going to run 10 times. It's going to go from 1 to 11. So it's not going to run infinitely. With a while loop, you run the risk of running an infinite loop. So let's just do that anyway. So we did this example here of a for loop, so we'll write it in the same way. Example with a while loop. So we'll do our while statement, and we probably have to set a condition before that as well. So while I is less than, well actually we'll do while true, because this is the really kind of like loop that will just continue running, because while true means it's just going to keep on and on running. So now we're going to have to force a break statement. So we'll set like a counter variable, and we'll say that's equal to 0. And then something like we would need to have counter, and I'm being very careful about this equals. We could do plus equals to increment it. We can do that. Let's have a little try. Counter plus equals 1. So we keep on incrementing our counter, and that's kind of like our check, just to make sure that our while loop doesn't get to infinity. So in some way we can at least monitor the counter, and then we can do something like print and then hello, and we will put comma I, for example, or not I, because we'll do counter. And again, we can put some sort of test, and this will make sure, or test or check, because this loop would just, if we ran it as it is now, this loop would just run forever, and I'd have to kind of like break out of the code over here. So we are going to put an if statement and then counter. Again, we can do something like greater than or equals to, just to do something new. So if counter is greater than or equals to, let's say we want it to run, we'll just do it 10 times because we don't want to have too much in there. So if counter is greater than or equal to 10, again, we will execute. We'll even run a little something else inside the if statement, print. We are finished. And we don't need to print the line number because we know which line number we're on. You know what, actually, anyway, let's just print it. We are finished, and then we'll put, oops, not 10, but actually counter. So wherever with the counter is at. So we are finished. And then we can make sure that we do the break statement, and that will break out of our while loop. And let's just run this code. And finally, actually, at the end, we'll put print, just to show that we've got to the end. Dash 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 the end dash dash dash, and we'll run this piece of code. And again, we do run it, and we see that we get hello 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 and 10, and then we are finished. We are finished is over here, and it's on the counter was at the increment of 10, because when it got to greater than or equals to 10, it stepped into this statement because it was equal to 10, and we printed that, and then we broke out of the loop. So that's basically the break statement, very simplistically, in a for loop. Then in a for loop, using this percentage sign here to make sure that we get the that the remainder is equal to 0. And then finally with the while loop over here in the same type of way, being noting that a while true loop could run forever, so we want to make sure that we have our break statement placed correctly. And that's it.